Someone else wanted to participate?
Yeah, Monica is also raising her hand. And she also has some comments in the chat, so maybe I'll read those. Monica says, it depends on how much English is known at home and the quality of their grammar. My English 413 class taught us how to set up peer tutors at school and train them. And also Talia has a question for you, Sandra. It says, Sandra, what does the research show about the silent period, where people who are new to Canada and ELL tend not to talk even if they may understand? So that's a question that we have.
I have heard about the silent period. I don't know a lot of research about it, but what I know is that we do have to be aware of it and not confuse this. So it's very common for English learners. So they start the exposure to English, right? And as it happens, when I mean, Dr. Haver knows more about language acquisition, but quite often, or most of the times, or all the time, we comprehend more than what we can speak, right? So English learners, there are some stages, about stages of language acquisition or second language acquisition, but a common stage that they go through is the silent period, when they are comprehending a lot of what they're hearing at school from their teachers or their peers, but they are not speaking the language. It could be for emotional embarrassment reasons. They don't feel confident enough to speak or to try it. There are many, many reasons behind them. But we as teachers just have to be aware of that and not confuse that with them not knowing what's happening in the classroom. So we have to figure out other ways for them to show us what they know. There is not necessarily verbal. So that's what I could say about the silent period. Just be aware of it, that it's part of the, it could be part of the language acquisition, second language acquisition process.
And also Juanita is raising her hand.
Yes.
Hi, Sandra. I just wanted to make a comment here, being in the ESL field for a little bit. So I don't think that there is so much harm, according to the research in the ESL field, for students to practice at home, even with non-native speakers. It is very helpful, as much as they practice. And according, for example, even if we talk about bilingualism, which is when the children are learning another language and they are born in a household where they probably speak another language. It can be Tagalog, it can be Spanish, it can be any other language. However, when they are interacting with the world outside of their household, they are going to be facing those challenges of learning, or the beauty of learning English. And so therefore they are going to learn English, and it won't harm their mother tongue, which is their first language. However, we are increasing the potential of that particular child learning another language, even though we as parents might think that might interfere with their first language, but actually children have the potential to learn as many languages as possible as long as they are exposed to them.
Exactly. What makes the difference is the exposure. And I think I did mention that it does, like, practice does not harm. What my request or my sharing here is that we should be just aware that there are, let me just show this here. So I'm going to talk about additive and subtractive bilingual environments. So when kids start having exposure to quality input to their first language, that could be a subtractive bilingual environment. So subtractive means that their first language exposure diminishes, and so they start losing it. So that's more about what this is, like, to not sacrifice learning the first language in order to prioritize. Do not sacrifice the first language to prioritize learning English. But yeah, practice does not hurt. But what research shows, and we have a very renowned researcher in the university. Her name is Joanne Peretti from the linguistics department, and she has done a lot of research on this topic. Where yes, what matters the most I mean, there are many factors in language, second language acquisition, but we see that input is very important. But the largest effect comes from quality input. So yeah, of course, it's going to be interacting with other English language learners in English, and that's going to give them opportunities to practice. But for input to be to have the most effect, it has to be quality input. And what I mean by quality input is having conversations where vocabulary is rich and where we provide them with the most variety of syntactic structures to, complex, not just simple sentences, but also complex sentences. And that usually is going to come from either native speakers or from English language learners that already have they're already fluent in English. But thank you for that clarification, Juanita.
Sharon
Okay.
is raising her hand. Do you want us to take that, or do you want to continue and then wait a little bit?
I do want to continue because I'm in point number 2 and I have 3 more points to go.
Okay.
But I think, I mean, I want to keep going, but I do want to, whatever we don't discuss, I mean, at the end, this is a discussion. And as I mentioned in the beginning, we're still in this journey of learning, and we're learning from each other. So whatever we don't discuss in class, we still have the class forum, and we can continue the discussion there. I mean, I hope we can have time to answer questions at the end.
Okay.
But if nothing, but that doesn't mean that discussion is over there, right? We can just continue with discussion by email or in the class forum. I think it's a very interesting, complex topic. So I'm very, very happy that we have a lot of participation. So using the L1 as a learning scaffold. So this has benefits in the social emotional dimension, because using their L1 in academic endeavors is positively related to academic self-concept and building confidence, right? When they're, especially like someone said, maybe they're going to through their silent period, or they don't feel confident enough to be either speaking or writing in English yet, or they have some limitations with vocabulary. So if they're able to show what they know in their L1, we are setting them up to be confident learners. This is also beneficial because they're able to view, when they're able to use their L1, they're able to view English as an addition to their L1 instead of something that is going to substitute their L1. So again, we want to make sure that they're growing in an additive bilingual environment and not subtractive, where their L1 might be, they will lose their L1. They also experience a sense of cultural stability and continuity. Academically, they're able to transfer, and there's a lot of research on this, they're able to transfer native language skills, such as phonological awareness, vocabulary, morphological and syntactic structures, everything they already know. I mean, it's going to depend on the language. There are languages that share more in common with English than other languages. So language typology matters, but what they already know, what they already acquire and learn from their first language, they can transfer this to the language, to the English language acquisition, not just orally, but also for literacy acquisition as well. And we know from a lot of research that native language skills are the main predictor of English literacy learning and are directly related to academic performance. Other reasons why growing in an additive bilingual environment is positive is because, this can expand our career opportunities, right? It doesn't hurt, and it usually benefits to add more than one language to our CVs. And there's also something called the bilingual cognitive advantage. There's not a lot of research on this. Most of the research that there is comes from this researcher, Bialystock. She's a Canadian researcher that has done a lot of research on bilingual English language learners, kids, and how it seems to be some sort of tendency for them to show better cognitive, not in all areas, but for example, cognitive flexibility or executive functioning as well. or there's other research that says it helps for Alzheimer and things like that. Again, that there's not a lot of research yet on those topics, but just for you to know, there is an area that it's out there by the bilingual cognitive advantage. These are just some quotes from the most prominent researchers on bilingual and English language learning. And I just want to highlight here this one by Jim Cummins, who is one of the most famous researchers on the topic. And I like the question that he makes here. And I think it's a question that as teachers we should be asking ourselves in our school boards. So does the school language policy view students as bilingual with talents in both their home language and English, or just as learners of English whose home language is irrelevant to academic success? So research shows, again, first language knowledge matters. It predicts second language acquisition. If they already have literacy knowledge on this or have developed oral skills on their first language, it's going to be easier for them to learn the second language, in our case, English. Some of the examples of how we can use L1 to our teaching advantage. So I choose to put this image of a blank book just to remind ourselves that no one is a blank slate, right? So kids, immigrant kids, already come with all of this knowledge and skills, right? So we should view ELLs as knowledgeable and skillful already, regardless of their level of English language proficiency. So we should always assume competence. And one of the things that we can teach students how to use their L1 as an advantage is through cross-linguistic transfer. They can transfer, for example, cognates. So cognates are words across languages. They're very similar in pronunciation or writing, and that they mean the same. So for example, again, I'm going to speak from my Spanish language. So the word impossible in English and the word impossible in Spanish is spelled almost the same. You add just one more S in English and impossible, but that's the only difference, and it means the same. And there are a lot of examples of cognates, and I have found across other languages that we find the same thing, right? Because languages usually evolve from a common origin. So we're going to find a lot of words that have the same meaning, have the same spelling. So kids are able to find out, even though they don't know the word, they're able to figure it out because of their first language. They also share, languages also share, not all languages, but a lot of languages share common morphemes. So for example, if I think of the word, right here. So we have the word altitude. I don't remember if it has double T's. I'm sorry if I'm misspelling this. I usually use my Google Translator or Grammarly. We have I think it's a double D, I'm not sure. So I apologize if it's misspelled. So we have the word altitude in English. And then Spanish, we have the word altura. So as you can see, they share the same morphological root, which is alt. I don't remember if it's Greek or if it's Latin, but they share the same morphological root. So we can teach children how to analyze how words are formed and morphologically formed, and they are able to figure out the meaning because they already know the meaning in their first language. I do not discourage code mixing. So code mixing is when kids try to incorporate some of the words in their first language to sentences in English. So they make this sort of combination between English vocabulary and vocabulary in their first language. And I have heard teachers, not all teachers, but I do have heard that, they say, oh, English only, or try to say it in English. So again, that's important because we have clearly established practice. It's important, but do not discourage it, because kids, if kids are able to code mix, They're just trying to figure out the way of how to communicate with you, with their peers. So being able again to use their first language to communicate ideas is going to help them to participate, to share knowledge, to ask questions or even concerns. And finally, we know that ELL students who learn to read in their native language can learn to read in English more easily than ELL students learning to read exclusively in English. So having already a literacy foundation in another language, it's going to have great benefits for second language literacy acquisition. So the third point that I want to share with you to support English language is to teach vocabulary every day. Language has many components, right? We have phonology, syntax, but to teach all of those components, it's important. But we should put some specific effort and emphasis on teaching vocabulary, teaching words. Why? Because vocabulary knowledge is a moving target. So everyone, not just ELLs, we are learning words every day, especially when we start to read, we're exposed to an increasing amount of words. So if we don't make an effort to teach vocabulary, not just unintentional teaching of vocabulary, unintentional learning through reading, like we have to explicitly teach vocabulary to ELLs so that we can prevent from this gap to become larger between them and their native English classmates. Also, we know that vocabulary is a foundational skill for literacy growth, and it's the major predictor of reading comprehension, not just for English learners, for English native speakers as well. Vocabulary, the words that we know early on, how many words we know, it's a great predictor to see how we're going to do later, a few years later, on reading comprehension. And it's the same for English language learners. So some of the best evidence-based practices to teach vocabulary to English learners include some of these ideas that I put here. I'm pretty sure that most of them you already know. So we have to make vocabulary learning meaningful. So we have to teach it in several contexts, right? So we have to provide several sentences and so on all the uses that we could give to that word. So we have the learning context has to be rich. It helps if we teach the words using semantic connections, right? So I put just here a quick example of musical instruments and how we can just develop the semantic connections of different types of musical instruments. So we have wind and non-wind, and then this connection just becomes more complex. It also helps to teach the word, but also teach similar words and teach antonyms words as well. We can implement personalized dictionaries or word banks. It helps if this dictionary has a friendly definition for students, or maybe a definition that they explain in their own words. And if we include a sentence where they are using the word, it helps even more. We have to teach morphology. So I already explained in a few slides ago how we can teach children how to analyze the internal structure of a word. So how that word is composed by morphemes, and not just the root morpheme, but if you look at this word matrix, we can also see how words have prefixes and suffixes, and how even though we don't know what the meaning of the whole word is, we might be able to recognize part of the word that can give us some clue of what that word means. I'm going to share the link to structural word analysis and other resources for literacy for English language learners in another slide, and I will send that. I will post that as well in eClass on where you can find more information on teaching morphology to children. And finally, we have to teach academic vocabulary. So conversational skills are important, and in second language acquisition, that's usually what happens first, right? So kids are able to be more fluent when they're having every daily conversations, everyday conversations, social conversation, social skills to interact with their peers. But we also need to put an effort and pay attention to academic words. And academic words are also called tier 2 words. So these words are less frequent than other high frequency words that we use on everyday conversation. But these words are found across subjects, and we can, like, they're not particularly specific to a subject. So they're not scientific, technical words that kids are going to learn either anyways, because we have to explain what those scientific, technical words mean. These are words that we use for several purposes that are found across subjects, and that we often assume, especially in the upper elementary grades, we assume that kids already know what they mean. Words such as analyze, explore, observe, arrange. And many times, and quite oftentimes, English language learners don't know the meaning of these words. So we have to teach them explicitly to them. And not just to them, everyone could benefit from teaching academic language. The fourth point that I want to talk about is we need to provide ELLs with comprehensive reading instruction. And in year 2000, there was this panel of reading experts that got together, analyzed a bunch of information, and they found out that effective reading instruction includes teaching students these 5 core skills. So we have phonological awareness, phonics, reading fluency, vocabulary, and reading comprehension strategies. So this is for all learners, for not just ELLs. So a few years later, in 2006, there was another panel that asked themselves the question, okay, so we already know that we need to teach children these 5 skills, but what about what skills? Sorry. So what skills do we need to teach English language learners? So again, they make a bunch of research. They look at a lot of papers, and they found out that it's pretty much the same skills, that there was not a big difference. What we need to teach native English speakers to what we need to teach English language learners, it's pretty much the same. The process is not very different. So we have to teach children we have to give them comprehensive reading instruction on phonological awareness, phonics, reading fluency, vocabulary, and reading comprehension strategies. Esther Jiva is is also a Canadian researcher, and she made this sort of pyramid of L2 reading comprehension, and she sort of established all of the factors that are involved in second language, or in our case, English as a second language acquisition. So there are many, many factors that make this process complicated. Not complicated, complex, right? But at the core of it, like if this part of you, which is the core of this learning process, it's the same for native speakers. And these are skills that as teachers we can teach. I mean, we cannot do anything about the typology of L1 and L2, or the family level of literacy, or, I mean, we should be able to do something about policies or what the age of onset is. But these foundational core skills we are able to teach, so we should teach them. And one thing that we should keep in mind is that even newcomers with little knowledge of English, they arrive to our classrooms and we don't really know where to begin. Well, we will begin as we will begin for native speakers. So even though they don't know English, or they're not very proficient in English, we can start teaching right away. Up on school entry, we can start teaching letter sound knowledge. So we can teach the alphabetic principle. we can start giving them vocabulary training, and we can start training them on phonological awareness, more specifically phonemic awareness, right? So phonemic awareness, so this skill to identify the sounds in speech, the sounds in words, the individual sounds in words. And that skills, it's a foundational skill to then be able to match those sounds to the letter. And I like this figure here because it shows how, regardless of language proficiency, the foundation of literacy lies on these blocks here. So that's where we should start right away, even though they don't know English. Once we have established these foundational skills of phonemic awareness and phonics knowledge, we can start teaching them sight words, sight word reading practice, guided reading as well. And we also, beyond vocabulary for reading comprehension, we also need to teach them specific reading comprehension strategies. And these comprehension strategies come before reading, during reading, and after reading. And one that is particularly important for English learners is to activate, prior to reading, to activate their background knowledge and to provide them with the cultural knowledge that they might need to know before reading certain type of text. That's very important before reading. Also from research, we know that if we give through graphic organizers, they're able to increase their reading comprehension. And this is particularly for English language learners. I mean, of course, other students are going to benefit from graphic organizers, but if they're able to create these maps where they identify the main idea and concepts and review the vocabulary in a visual way, in a systematic and explicit way, we are going to benefit greatly their reading comprehension. So I think, so again, children who are proficient readers in their L1, regardless of what the L1 writing system looks like. I mean, I know this is a blurry image, not the best image I could find, but as we can see, there's more than just the Roman or Latin alphabet that we use in English, that we use in Spanish, and many, many other languages. There are several of other types of writing systems across the world. But regardless of what their writing system looks like, if they already know how to read, how to write in their L1, they're going to have better chances to become good readers in their L2, in our case, English. It helps if the language is already similar to English, but still, it's still going to help even though it's not. And I'm going to share these resources in eClass as well. Now, before I go to the last point, I realized that I started going too fast after I kind of felt that I was running out of time. So I don't know if you want to make a comment here or you have a question here before I go to my last point. We have the time. I'm just looking at the time and I can see that we still have half hour to finish. So I don't know if anyone wants to comment something about what we have heard, share their own experience, teaching literacy, teaching vocabulary, what they have seen in the classroom happening, some strategies maybe. Yes, Monica.
One of my English classes, I can't remember the number, it might have been 413 or 416, but it was about cross-cultural connections and teaching students who have a different culture. And she really advocated for a vocab word or words of the day, or it could be like a figure of speech. And then they would identify that, they would introduce it in literacy, like in a book that they had chosen of a culture that pertained to their classroom. And then they would look for that word throughout the day and they would put that word into their speech to just solidify it. And then every day they would like change the vocab word. And another thing they talked about was peer tutoring, how you set up a peer to teach their peer and you give them a complex task. I just remember a student modeled it and we all did it. And there was like math shapes and they were required to make the same shape as their peer. And their peer had to tell them in a step-by-step scaffolding process what to do using academic words, as you said. and just how much the research said that it improved vocab, it improved social skills, it improved their comprehension, and how valuable it was. So I thought that was very, yeah, those were good takeaways. And we also had a lot of games that ELLs could use in classrooms. So like I have a whole file of different games for ELLs and adaptations you can make for them.
Absolutely. There's so many resources. If you're not, like me and have no time to read, a lot of the times you have no time to read and like read a book about English language, you can just go YouTube. There are so many amazing videos on strategies and resources. It's just have to dedicate a little bit of your time, and you're gonna find these amazing ideas. And yeah, a lot of them definitely match to what you're saying, Monica. Thank you for sharing them.
Sharon had her hand raised since last time. So maybe if Sharon wants to share something.
Yeah, so that was around the conversation of if you should, as like a parent, like when you go home as a student who's an ELL, if you should work at home essentially on your English. And for me, actually, it's very interesting because I was an ELL when I was young. So when I came here, I went straight into kindergarten with absolutely no concept of the English language. And it was actually not that good for me to have my parents try and help me learn English because they didn't really know English that well. And they very much put some ideas into my head that probably wasn't right. It took me probably until about grade 5 or 6 until I was able to say the word 3 properly because of how my parents taught me how to say it. So just in that personal experience, I think it's a lot more important to work on, your L1 language at home, speak whatever home native language you speak there, and focusing on the English within school.
Thank you for sharing that experience. Yeah, again, I mean, I think your experience reflects a lot of the experiences that I have heard, but as other have also commented, it's not always the case. Some like practicing at home, it's beneficial. Research also shows that interactions between siblings, right? Especially when there's an older sibling that has had more exposure at school, can teach the younger siblings, and they end up just having most of their interactions in English, even though the interactions with parents are in the native language. So experiences are going to change. Again, English language learners are such a diverse group that we cannot put them in a box, but definitely your experience reflects what a lot of families experiences. And I was just reading through the chats and someone mentions like, yeah, there are a lot of parents that are scared that their kids are going to lose their language and their cultural the cultural that they are associated with as well. Thank you for that. Okay, so I'm going to move on to my last point that I want to highlight, and that's to use response to intervention, or RTF, and so in a social cultural factors as our assessment framework. So teachers, one of the purposes why we framework, yeah, and so and that's to use response to intervention, or RTF, and so in a social cultural factors as our assessment framework. So teachers, one of the purposes why we assess students, yeah, we want to know how they're doing, but we usually use assessment because we want to make informed decisions regarding the next steps for instruction, right? So what comes next for this student? What do I need to be doing? What level of supports he needs? What intensity of supports they need? So that's why we assess, to inform our instruction. When teaching ELLs, how to assess them can become a challenge, right? Because of language and literacy, lack of proficiency on language and literacy. And a major concern for teachers and for administrators as well, and for parents as well, is if we are not able to assess them properly, how are we going to distinguish between ELLs that are performing below the expectation due to lack of proficiency in language, or ELL students that actually have a learning disability? So that is a challenge. And a way that we can prevent from placing students in special education services, or to attribute their lack of learning to language when it's actually a learning disability, is to use RTI, response to intervention. So RTI, I'm not going to go in detail on RTI here. I think Colleen McClure already spoke a little bit of how it works. But RTI is considered a prevention intervention model. It is preventative. I'm sorry if I'm not saying that word correctly, but it's preventive because we screen all students, not just the students that are performing poorly. Like we screen all students from the beginning, right? And then we go from there and we establish a systematic monitoring of their progress. And then from that assessment and from that monitoring of their skills, we use data to inform our instruction and to decide on the different levels of supports that they need, right? So we often call these levels of support tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 type of interventions. But what it's at the core of this process is assessment. And response to intervention has been highlighted as an effective way to reduce the number of inappropriate referrals to special education of English language learners. So, before I forgot to mention, so usually what happens is that if we are constantly monitoring student progress, not just at the beginning and then at the end of the year, but we make this an ongoing process, we are able to establish a baseline and then see if the progress of students is constant and is at a normal rate. Because research shows, and this is actually from Canadian research, because sometimes in the United States, the reality is different. But it shows that English language learners pretty much learn at the same rate than our native English speakers. So if we see a constant rapid progress, as it is expected for neurotypical learners, then we could be, then we can conclude that, okay, so whatever we're doing, the supports that we're giving the student, it's working, he's learning. Perhaps it's not at a grade level expectation, but he's learning, he's in the way of learning, and he's acquiring the skills that he needs to be acquiring. However, if we see by our constant monitoring and our constant assessment that the progress that they're doing is very slow, this in spite intensive intervention, if we see a lack of progress, then we can start thinking, okay, so maybe something else is happening, because the expectation is that they show growth because they are, they are neurotypical, so they're able to learn at similar rates than we will expect in native English speakers. So in that case, we could consider that there could be some sort of cognitive difficulty or a learning disability or something else happening that goes beyond language and literacy proficiency. So a lot of the questions, one question that is frequently asked, okay, so should we use the same screening and assessment tools used with English language learners, English native speakers? Should we use the same tools that we use with them? Should we use them with English language learners? Is that fair? There's this study by Gersten that show, by analyzing several studies, that measures of phonological processing, letter knowledge, and reading a list of words are reliable measures to assess reading skills in English language learners. So yeah, some of these tests we are able to use with English language learners and obtain some very valid information of how they are progressing on the skills, talking specifically about literacy. However, relying on mainstream assessment tools can affect our, and we can misunderstand the causes behind the lack of response to instruction or to intervention from our ELL students if we only stick to this formal or standardized measures of assessment. We have to consider other types of assessment, such as formal assessment, and we have to integrate into that assessment the cultural factor, right? So we just went back. So I started this presentation talking about cultural responsive teaching. So the assessment that we do has to also be culturally responsive. And for assessment to be fair, we have to be aware of assessment bias. An example that I thought of, and I tried to, and I chose this picture, is that in some cultures, they're not used to having, for example, time test, right? That is something that here we're very used to. Okay, so you have 5 minutes, you have 30 minutes to finish this task. And we're used to work under a time limit. But in other cultures, they're not used to working in this way, and they prioritize accuracy over speed. So if we don't take that into consideration, then we could be misinterpreting the results in a test or in a task for a student, because that student took his time because he prioritized accuracy over speed. So that's why we need to use multiple sources to make informed decisions about our students' ability and how effective our instruction is. So to summarize everything that I said, I know I've talked a lot today. I am really sorry if I talked a lot and this was a lot of information. But basically, what I wanted to share with you is that teachers should be aware of their own cultural biases and identify how their beliefs, values, and assumptions about education affect their interaction with culturally and linguistically diverse students. Culturally responsive teachers value and nurture the cultural diversity of their students and utilize it to enhance academic performance. ELL students with strong language and literacy skills in their native language or dominant language are more likely to achieve stronger oral and written language skills and succeed academically. Teachers should incorporate vocabulary instruction into content instruction across subjects. So this is not just for language arts, right? We should teach academic vocabulary across subjects. ELLs benefit from explicit and intensive instruction in phonological awareness, phonics, reading fluency, vocabulary, and specific strategies for reading comprehension. Finally, teachers should be observant of ELLs with learning disabilities. Constant and systematic assessment should provide quantitative and qualitative data to determine if students are making consistent progress, regardless of grade level expectations. And that will be all for me. So I don't know if we have a few minutes for questions, comments, complaints.
Juanita is raising her hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on what Sandra was telling us about wanted to get to know your students. It's very, very important and know what kind of culture, if they are still practicing it here in Canada, and what is their native language. So for example, in my practicum, I saw a student who sometimes seemed to be lost and didn't know what to do. So I would approach him and trying to find out what was happening. He couldn't communicate. This was kindergarten. So he couldn't communicate very well. And I was just trying to figure out what kind of language he would speak at home. So I didn't know. So I thought it was Tagalog. I thought it was Spanish. So I tried both. I failed. So then I had to go to the teacher and ask her, if she knew what language the child spoke at home. So, but interestingly was that she didn't know. And this was March, almost at the end of the school year. And she didn't know what language the child spoke at home. So I thought that it was very important to know, since at the very beginning of the school year, try to find out what languages you might have in your classroom, what kind of languages your children are speaking at home. So I just thought that was a very interesting thing for me to observe at that point. The second thing that I wanted to mention was that I love ESL. It's just fantastic. And I was just so excited to see that this was in this course. So you talk about cognates, and so that is so true. There are so many words that are similar to French or similar to German or other languages, and similar to Spanish, as you mentioned. And there are also the false cognates, which is the opposite. Sometimes we might know that this word, oh, I know what this means. So this means in my language. And in that case, it's not. It can be a little bit, not dangerous, but a little bit embarrassing sometimes. I have this example, if I may share. Once I was talking to an instructor in Mexico, and obviously they were teaching us a bilingual school, and they were teaching these students. And then one time this student came up to the teacher and said, teacher, this student is molesting me. And then she was like, but she understood, because that was her language, right? Her native language was Spanish. So she knew what the student was trying to convey, which was like, oh, she's annoying me, but molesting.
Yes.
So that was just hilarious, but that's something that we need to be aware of. And my last comment was about, practicing is very important. No matter who you practice with, it's gonna be helpful. Even if you practice, for ELL learners, if you practice with a mirror, which is advised to students, that is just helpful. And something that Sharon was mentioning, that at the beginning of her, when she was like a very, very small child, when she went into kindergarten, and she had this problem with the word 3, she didn't know how to pronounce it. Well, even native speakers have that same problem. So that might not be related to that specific situation. I don't know what the situation is, but I know that this is a problem even with native speakers, that later in life, when they go to school, they correct that. But even the teacher, like this happened to a native person. Actually, he was my instructor, and he told us that story. That's all I wanted to mention. Thank you.
Talia?
Hi, I was just wondering, so it's the beginning of the school year. I get some kids from Germany. I don't speak German. What is like the first steps? Because other than labeling everything in the classroom, that's the only advice I've been given.
I mean, I don't speak German either, but I will try to get as much information from these students, right? Because even though we say, oh, well, Germany, okay, but that's still, it's putting all of Germany in one box, right? Like I'm from Mexico, and Dali is from Mexico as well, but we come from very different regions, and the culture even changes within the same country. So I will try to get as much information. Okay, so yeah, they're from Germany, but what part of Germany? If the parents speak English, you could speak to the parents, or if there's a translator available, or if you are able to find, okay, so do we have any German community here that I can get some information, someone who can give me sort of a sense of who the students are, and just finding a way to know your student and to make them because before worrying about, okay, so I have to teach them vocabulary and literacy, that shouldn't be your concern number one. The concern number one is, how do I make the students that are coming from a different culture, from a different country, from a different language, how do I make them still feel that they belong to my classroom? And the question is, well, get to know them and see how you can connect with them. That for me will be the
I-
most important part.
Thanks. I was also wondering, because I had 2 kids from Mexico as well, I'm sure. Okay, so during like social class, they wouldn't do anything. They'd go on Duolingo on their laptops. Because my teacher was like, you don't make worksheets for them because I'm not going to be able to sustain that. Because I speak Spanish, so I could have done that. But she wasn't willing to do that. So I'm like, what do you do during subjects other than like English? What do you do with them?
Well, I think I mentioned, but I will try to make the content meaningful to them as well. For example, I mean, I'm thinking about, again, my experience in the English immersion schools. And I think I mentioned before that we follow the Alberta curriculum. And I think I don't remember the grade, but part of the social studies curriculum was to learn about indigenous cultures. So our Mexican children in Mexico were learning about indigenous groups from Canada. And I was like, yeah, I understand that that's important. And it's important for the teacher because the teacher comes from Canada and wants to share that, and it's in the curriculum expectation. But what about the indigenous groups from Mexico? I mean, at the end, what's the big idea behind the topic? And I'm pretty sure we can find some common ground to add that in some way or make that connection. Okay, so what about, what are the indigenous groups in Mexico? And even though you don't have access to a text or something in Spanish, they can share that experience through pictures and maybe find there are a lot of similarities between groups, right? So they maybe in that way you can include them in the instruction as well. I mean, that's just one idea. I'm pretty sure that you can think of more ways to include them in the instruction.
Something that I can add, for example, is just that if trying to find out what the problem is. For example, it might not be that they are not interested, but as it was mentioned before, there might be some other underlying problems, right? So that we don't know, we're not aware of. And so it would be interesting, I guess, that the best, I don't know, for me, I think what I would do, it was just to try to connect with the student a little bit more, try to get to know them a little bit more, see if they react to the words, to the questions that I ask, and try to find out a little bit more, because sometimes they might need some other type of help that might not be only with the language.
Absolutely. Yeah, a lot of it has to do with social, emotional factors, right? Of just everything that they're facing. And they don't necessarily come from, and these social factors, you face them regardless of age. Like you still have this, I mean, I'm going to generalize here, but there is this need to belong and to not being perceived as different when you come to a new country and a new culture. It happens to me. Like, for example, my name, often when I introduce myself, I say Sandra, because I know that's how you pronounce it in, like American Canadian English. But my name is not Sandra. My name is Sandra. It's different. Even though you spell it the same way, it's different. And I do it because, yeah, I try to make things easier for you to understand what's my name, because it has happened to me that I say Sandra and people is like, what do you say? What's your name? Can you repeat that again? But the real reason is that I'm just trying to fit in. I'm just trying to, being perceived like not different. So it happens even to me as an adult. So for sure, there are these social, psychological factors that we also need to consider, not just the language acquisition process, for sure. Anyone else wants to comment or share their experiences as well?
Yeah, Sandra, I just want to also chime in on that. I also have a pretty unique name. that happens to get butchered often, even though it's only 5 letters. So a lot of times I notice that it's not really because it's a unique name. It's really because of the lack of willingness to really try to pronounce the name, to try to understand the sounds and how they flow. So I just think it's very important, especially because Edmonton is so diverse as pre-service teachers, soon to be service teachers. Don't just try to just whip up the name when you see it on the attendance list. Really think about how that would make the child feel. I understand if it's not an everyday name. However, we've done harder things in life, and just really taking your time to like assess the name, assess the sounds, and like make that effort, because that goes a long way. And that, I think, is something that is like a westernized thing, and that falls solely on the shoulder of whoever is trying to correctly pronounce it. There just has to be more effort than saying, or even I've had teachers say, can you just tell me your name? Like, no, we need to be making the effort to try to make everyone really feel included and welcomed and like respected and understood. So sorry, I just wanted to chime in on that because that is super true, and I hear it and see it a lot.
And as I will have to say, as a teacher, like I had the opportunity to teach a course at the university. And of course, even as myself from Mexico, like, there were some names that I really didn't know how to pronounce. There was this one name in particularly. Her name is Maraika, I remember, and she participated a lot. Like, she really liked to participate. And every time I have to, oh yeah, please participate, student. Like, I will use, oh yes, please. Like, I will avoid saying her name, because I was like embarrassed that I didn't know how to pronounce it. And I remember she told me like a couple of times, but my memory is really bad. So I kept forgetting how to pronounce her name. So it got to a point that I was very embarrassed, that I didn't know how to pronounce the name. So I was like, I cannot avoid, like, this is not the right thing. Like, I want to know how to pronounce the name of my student. So what I did is, it's not that you have to figure out on your own, like, involve the student in the process. Like, you can be honest and say, you know what, I'm having some trouble remembering and how to pronounce your name. Like, can you help me out? Like, ask their help. And then the student gave me this great strategy. Or just think of I, because that was the part that it was confusing for me, like Maraika. So just think of I when you pronounce my name. And so she gave me the strategy herself. And then from then on, I was able to pronounce it correctly. And that made me very happy. So don't be afraid of mispronouncing your student's name. Like, that could happen. But just like, Esosa, is that your name? Talking about pronunciation.
Yes, it is.
So that's, Esosa said, like, even though you're embarrassed, you make the effort. Like, someone else was asking, like, where do I begin? Begin on learning your students' actual name, right? And don't make them feel like, okay, so I have to change my name to make things easier for you. I think that's a very way to start as well. Jen.
So my cousin married a Muslim, so has become Muslim, and the way that she has named her children come from that culture. And my mom would just connect it to things. So like, her one daughter's name is Anissa, and she'd be like, oh, so she's a niece, right? Like, she's my niece, and that's how she would remember it. And so it's just kind of connecting it to things that can help you remember the process of how the name is pronounced.
Yeah, you have to think of ways. You just have to get creative, or ask the student to, like, can you help me? Like, I'm pretty sure he has asked that question many times. So I'm sure that he has the answer how you can have a strategy to remember how to pronounce the name.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
Just wanted to add something to that, something that just came to my mind. It was something that usually when classes it's just the first day of school and we don't know the name, so we usually have a game of trying to know our names. And so they pronounce their names, we all repeat them and try to memorize the names of all. And hopefully everybody can put an effort, like I do very often, put an effort of memorizing the 25 names that we might have in that class. And sometimes students are just like, oh wow, how can you do it? And so it becomes a challenge, and everybody learns the names of their peers, because sometimes the whole school year goes by, oh, I don't know his name. So it is a good way of making your classroom and having the sense of community as well.
Absolutely, right? If our goal is to belong, how do we belong to a place when people don't know our names? Yeah, for sure.
Sandra, I wanted to ask, what if the child has already modified their name, but you know that they have a different name in their first culture? Is that a conversation to have with their parents, how they want their child addressed, or can you speak to that?
Well, I mean, I will speak as an ELL myself. I do it automatically. Like I already say, oh, my name is Sandra, Sandy. But if you ask me like, oh, okay, Sandra, is that how you want me to say your name? Or how will you like me to say your name? Or how do you prefer to be called? Like I will, more than asking the parents, I will ask the kid, like, is that how you like? Because I know that some kids from some cultures do feel more comfortable with their Western, Anglo-Western name. And that's okay. I mean, I think that's their choice. And if that's how they feel comfortable, but the fact that you're asking, I think that makes, that will be very, it's a way to connect with them as well. And they will feel that you actually care. So I think that's what's important, to show that you care. Okay.
That makes a lot of sense, to just the effort of showing that you care and that it matters, that they matter to you by pronouncing their names right. Because in a lot of cultures, names have definite meaning. Like we named our kids with meanings. And so like, I just want to make sure that that's respectful to the person. And maybe in time they would like share their, I want to say real name, but share their like first language name. So yeah, maybe that's just as relationship evolves.
They prefer the Canadian name, like someone is saying in the chat, like that's okay too. I mean, okay. Well, that will be all for me. Thank you very much for listening to me, and I talk a lot today, and let's keep the conversation going. I think this can be a very interesting topic, because we're talking about culture, and that's always so passionate to talk about culture. So if you have more things to comment and do you want to discuss, let's put them on the forum. I think we can make this a very interesting discussion for sure. Thank you.